What's going on, team? I'm excited to really share, Jose. I'm aware that, our intention is to continue to come to these platforms and just add as much value as we possibly can. I think the best way to show people that you can help them is by helping them. And, most people teach mindset because they can't teach tactics, and we're all about tactics and trying to equip people with very specific information, specialized knowledge that they can take and apply in the marketplace. So last week we were talking about a lead source, right? That's a little bit outside the conventional lead source. I know a lot of the kind of voices in the real estate world, they talk about the 4 horsemen, which are expireds, for sale by owners, cancels, and just listed, just solds. And me and you are of the mindset that, there's lots of other sources that, agents should and could be calling, right? And by limiting them to those 4, they're actually limiting their capacity to do more transactions. And when you go from a marketplace that does 6 or 7 million in transactions to 2 years in a row, probably around 4 million, just a lot less transaction volume. And what I'm seeing, Jose, is a lot of agents sticking their head in the sand and not really doing anything about it. You know what I mean? Like not seeking out new lead sources, not trying new things, not, whether it be the cash offer programs we've been talking about, PPLs, PPC, probates, and divorces, and a source that we'll talk about today. And as a result, what I'm watching happening is they're going from like 22 million in volume 2 years ago to 8 million in volume.
That's a significant drop.
A significant drop, bro. And, I had a conversation with somebody recently and I was like, I appreciate that. What I'm aware of, though, is you haven't expanded into any new lead sources. You haven't
made any changes.
Made any changes, man. You're just doing the same thing, right? So that's why we're having this kind of series on different lead sources. So we've talked about probates, which is a wonderful source for me. It was, 50, 60% of our business at one point for about 5-6 years in a row, listing 60 of those per year. We talked about divorces. I know you've done really well with those. We've talked about cash offers, and we walk people through systematically how to have those conversations. And today we wanted to talk about absentee homeowners and how that source is actually a fantastic source for listing opportunities.
Yep. I agree 100%. So it's interesting because what I tell people is that all of the scripts are connected. So like, let's say that you're talking to an expired. Is there a chance that expired could be going through a divorce? Yes. So if you don't know how to handle divorce listings, then you're going to miss out on that opportunity. You're calling expires. Could that person turn into like, hey, look, one of the owners just died and now we don't know what to do? Could it turn into a probate? Yes. So what I feel is that the more versed you are in all of these different things, the more opportunities that you'll have for yourself. The other thing is, in my market, the expires, the probates, the canceled listings, those were all extremely, extremely competitive. And there wasn't enough of them. Maybe there'd be like 5 expireds in a day. Yes, 5 in a day, 2 in a day, 3 in a day. And you got 30 agents chasing them, 50 agents chasing them. Like the math just doesn't add up. So when I recognize that, I would talk to other people in other markets and they'd have 50 expires in a day. I'm like, we're dealing with different market dynamics. So I had to expand. So one of the ones that we expanded into was absentee owners and for rent by owners as well too. So what do I mean by for rent by owners and what do I mean by absentee owners? A for rent by owner is just like an expired or a FSBO in a sense that they're listed for rent. The only difference is that they're listed by owner. So we talked in a previous series as to you can do just listed, just sold calls, but how cool would it be if you were on an airplane and you could see all of the houses that had an X on top of them and all of those people were considering selling or are going through some sort of life event. So with the for rent by owner, they're going through a life event. The life event is that they have potentially a vacant property. They're going to have to find a new tenant. And in some cases, and correct me if I'm wrong, but these homeowners are considering multiple options. They're not just considering renting it. They've thought about selling it. So it's a perfect time to basically connect with them and reach out to them and ask them what their plans are. So what I did is I would go on Zillow, I would go for the properties that were for rent, and I would find the ones that did not have a property management company. And the ones that did not have a property management company, we would reach out to them directly and let them know, like, hey, Jose Morales here. I'm calling about the property listed for rent. Is this the owner? Almost just like a FISBO call, and then we'd ask them to see that we know that it's listed for rent, if they would ever consider selling it. And what would happen sometimes is you would get people, as a matter of fact, I am considering selling it. Or you would get people that would say, no, I'm not considering selling this property, but I have another one that I am considering selling. You got to remember that a lot of these for rent by owners, a lot of times have multiple properties. They are people that have built a decent portfolio and are just renting it. So what happened for me is, whenever I was dialing these people, and we can get into the absentee next, is I would find people that are looking to sell now. I would find people that were looking to sell other properties. I would find people that are like, no, but check back with me in a year or two, and that's when I would consider selling it. And I actually am considering selling 2 properties at that time, basically. So it could lead to multiple listings. It's people that have properties for rent. And in some cases, some of these people are considering selling as well as renting. Now, Aaron can talk to you guys about absentee owners.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's a very kind of related source, right? So I kind of lump them into both, because absentees oftentimes, they may present as for rent by owners, and they're just
Yeah.
not here. They're not locally in this geographic area. Others could be is where you could pull a list of homeowners that don't live in this geographic area. What's really interesting, Jose, is that I don't think most agents really have spent any time thinking about data, and how it's actually like, data is like a business. Like, there are people that sell lists, and all you have to do is tell them specifically the type of list that you want. And what I also find very interesting, and then we can get into, like, that conversation of what it sounds like. We had our brother from another mother, Angel, on a call. He's moving. Did you hear that, bro? It's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, he told me about it. So, but anyway, we had him on a call, and he did this really awesome presentation on data, and how he actually did a analysis in his geographic area onto what lead sources were converting at the highest level. Now, that's like so foreign, I think, to most agents, because they're just like, yo, let me pull expireds, cancels, for sale by owners, and I'm going to call, right? Or some just listed, just solds. And his logic behind that, and this will lead somewhere, I promise. His logic behind that was, let's say we take 2 people. One is exceptionally skilled. The other is also exceptionally skilled. One is calling a source that converts on average, let's say at 10%. Another one is calling a source that converts on average at 17%. What will happen over time is the person who's calling the source that converts at a higher level will get better outcomes, period.
And
there's nothing you can do about it. And truthfully, even if I'm a little bit more skilled than the person who's calling the lead source that converts at a higher level, they're still going to beat me.
Because they have better opportunities.
Because
And that's what I was doing back in the day. Back in the day, like, everybody was just calling expires for sale by owners, and I started expanding into all these different sources. And at that time, maybe I wasn't that much better than other people. I was just expanding into other sources. So what happened is I started taking more listings, which gave me more experience, which then gave me more confidence. And then that led to now the person you see here today. But a part of it was I was doing this back in 2014, 2013, 2015, because I had certain goals and I was committed to them, and I was going to figure out a way to take the listings.
Yeah. So I think that that's like a key insight that I would want agents to take away, is that studying data and studying which sources are converting at higher levels is a way to be more effective and efficient with your time. Because if I'm going to spend the time, and I was doing this, Jose, I just didn't do it in a analytical way. It was more like a like observational or pragmatic or kind of probabilities way, not actually data driven. But I said to myself, okay, what's the probability that a probate is going to have a super like high chance of selling? And I was like, well, it's really high, right? And is that more probable than somebody that I'm just going to call randomly? And the answer is yes. So for that reason, I would spend more time there, and it just made me more efficient. So what Angel found in his marketplace, okay, that I thought was super interesting is that one of the things that were converting at high levels, Jose, was absentee homeowners.
Yeah.
It was like 17%. And I think that flies in the face of what most people, I think most people would be like, yeah, I mean, that's like a source, but it's like down the line after the four horsemen. It's like, how, for sale by owners, expired, just listed, just sold, past client centers of influence. It's like, okay, maybe I'll do some absentee homeowners after that. Well, what's actually showing up in the data was that was actually the source that was converting at the highest. If I remember correctly, it was like 17%. It was like much higher than others. So then he started to focus his energy and effort there.
Hence receiving better results. So
yes.
Basically, like imagine an absentee owner, the simplest way of putting it is somebody that does not live in the property. And there's two different types of absentee owners. There's absentee owners that just own rental property. And then there's absentee owners that live out of the county. And then there's absentee owners that live out of the state as well, too.
And what I'm aware of is list providers
can get you
granular with the data, guys. Like we're just randomly pulling in, just like whatever, like smiling, dialing, making a pile. And I just think it's such a it's so glaring to me. Like it's so obvious to me that if you want to be more efficient, like the information's available to you. They can get you those granular lists. Like, yo, I want an absentee homeowner that lives out of state and has 65% equity in their property. They'll pull that list for you and give it to you. I want an absentee homeowner that, lives within the state and bought their home within the last 10 years. And I want that list. Great. They'll give it to you. So just being like more intentional and purposeful with the sources that you're calling and not just going back to the tried and true because that's what you've always done. So what I think is happening, and you tell me, right? It really seems like what's happening is because there's been so much loud voices in the real estate space screaming about those four horsemen, which are good sources. It's not that they're bad. But the problem is nobody's taking a deeper dive in the data and the information and saying like, hey, is this actually the most efficient and effective source?
Except the investors.
Except the investors.
The investors are doing this every single day.
And because you're in a big mastermind with like a lot of investors, and this is all they do is data, right?
Well, not only that, but they're not, they are pulling very specific lists. So like, because as agents, we've been programmed to only call expires for sale by owners just sold. If you talk to a group of agents, most of them are going to tell you this is what we call, which is just, I mean, they're there and they're good, but it's just very competitive because everybody's calling them. So like these investors are calling different lists. It's funny because when I first started pulling different lists, the way that I did it wasn't the way that Angel did it. Angel will take like a large piece of data, run all these different analysis on it. I would do it very simply. I would check out the new listings on the MLS. I'd be like, oh, Aaron just got a new listing. Let me check the tax records or real list. And then I would try to see if I could see any patterns on it. Be like, oh, this person bought in 2009. Click on the next listing. Be like, oh, this person bought in 2010. Oh, click on the next listing. Oh, this person bought in 2012. So my very first pattern that I noticed was that people that had bought at the bottom of the market were upsizing. So they were selling and buying and basically taking all the equity that they built up over those years and buy something bigger. So the first list that I really just purchased was give me everybody that bought from 2009 to 2015. And my script was, hey, look, I know you bought in 2000 at the bottom of the market. I know prices have increased. I know that you have a lot of equity. Would you ever consider selling your property? And they'd be like, well, as a matter of fact, I'm thinking about buying something bigger,
Yeah. And what you did was smart. Here's the right word. It was anecdotal. Like you would just notice like a pattern. You're like, oh, this is maybe like a pattern, right? And that's one way to notice patterns. And that's kind of like what I did with probates was like anecdotal, like, okay, and thinking in probabilities, right? Me and you have talked about that a lot, how it frees up Like, well, what's the probability that this is true, right? Versus something else. So, and that's a good place to start. You can also take it to another level where they have analytics and they can tell you down to the actual numbers and percentages. This is what's
Yeah.
converting at higher levels. Like,
And
that's
that's the level
crazy.
Angel does it. That's the level Angel does it.
That's the level Angel does it. He does it at that level. Like, we
Yeah.
know in this geographic area, here's what's converting at higher levels, and here are the percentages. So we can call your list if you want to, or we can call that one. It's like, well, I'm definitely going to call that one. And when he said that, Jose, it was really striking to me because he was like, yeah, dude, like you could be like the Aaron Novello or the Jose and be like super skilled, but I could have unskilled dialers or way less skilled than you, and they're going to beat you. They're going to set more appointments than you because I'm just calling better information.
Yeah. Which
And
is
that's
true.
true. Right. Like the ego part of you wants to be like, nah, but then like you think about it, you're like, wait a minute, that's true. Like that'll totally end up being the case over time.
Yeah. And what I'm noticing is that a lot of the agents that their volume has dropped, like, and this is something that I'm extremely proud of. Our market probably has gone down about 40%, and we're on pace to do the same amount of volume and the same amount of business in 2000 that we did in 2021, which was funny. We had a quarterly and I said, hey, look, like we actually haven't really grown. And the people were like, no, you actually have grown because the market has retracted 40% and you've been able to maintain the amount of business that you have with a down market. So what I'm noticing with a lot of agents that are struggling or their volume has dropped is that they haven't made any adjustments to their
No
business.
adjustments. Instead, what they've just done, Jose, is I need to do what I was doing before, harder, faster, quicker, like more. They're just like going
should I wake
back.
I should wake up at 6:30 to call expires instead, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Or
then I
like
need
call
to,
them at 9:00,
yes,
9 p.m.
that's exactly right. So they keep going back to what worked previously. And I understand why, because money has an addictive quality. And because of it, we get addicted to the way that we receive it. The problem with that is that it's not directly correlated with like what's happening in the marketplace. So it only logically makes sense that if the amount of opportunities shrink, then what I should be doing is expanding the opportunities that are available to me, and that's getting into different lead sources. And there will be a period of discomfort because you really don't know what you're doing, and then you'll just figure it out. Like I know you went down that route of like PPL and PPC or whatever, and I know at the beginning you really didn't know what you were doing.
No.
At time though, as time has progressed over the last year, you've really refined that. You dialed it in. You're super comfortable, super confident when you go on those presentations and have those conversations. So let's say you do the data in your geographic area, you have somebody like Angel help you or somebody who can provide lists, and they tell you, hey, for rent by owners or absentee, which oftentimes present themselves in the same way, because you can call a for rent by owner and they end up being an absentee homeowner, you know what I mean? Trying to get their place rented. What would that conversation sound like?
So with the for rent by owners, I would actually, and even with for sale by owners, when I would call for sale by owners, I would try to make it sound like not what I would say, like I was a tenant. Because if they get the whiff that you're a real estate agent, they're going to
They're gonna hang
reject you right away. And
Yeah,
even
so I
with a
heard
for
what
sale
you
by owner,
did there. You were like, yeah, I was calling about the property that's for rent.
yeah. And now you're like, oh yeah, how can I help you? Or yes, what would you like to know?
And
Or
then you
yes,
notice their
would you
tone
like
drop immediately when you're like,
would you like to go see it? Basically, but I'm basically in an introduction. You got to build a little bit of curiosity. If you come like if Zillow calls me and they're like, hey, I'm calling from Zillow, I'm like, oh my goodness, like talk about the timing, like But I'm like, yeah, I'm looking for Aaron. Or I might even say, yeah, I'm calling about the property that's listed for rent. I think it's located on I think Banana Street. Yeah, what would you like to know? And then after they do that, well, look, the reason for my phone call is I'm actually a local realtor. I know that you have it listed for rent. Was just wondering, would you ever consider selling this property? And then they're either going to say, yes, I would, no, I wouldn't,
and what I really
or
like about that
never.
question, yeah, and what I really like about that question is it either gets me to a definite no or a definite yes, or maybe it's only those.
Yeah.
And then because like you were saying, the story of one is a story of all, and once you incorporate uh, the process of asking questions to discover, right? And you've incorporated, you spent the time to like, chant and role play. So you have these kind of dialogues. Now it's just like I get to pick and choose when I notice patterns, like which direction are we going? So if they're like, yeah, I actually would consider selling it. All right, well, I mean, I appreciate your willingness to share that. The reason that I ask is we have the great fortune of helping a lot of families in your geographic area get properties sold quickly and efficiently for top dollar. I guess I'm curious, in terms of what you want, because that's what's most important here. How soon would you like to actually get it sold? And then just be quiet and be like, well, we're trying to rent it out. Okay. And do you have a preference? Like if you had it your own way, would you prefer to deal with tenants, from long distance, or would you just prefer to cash out and be done? Shh. Listen. And they'll tell you, well, my preference would be to really get it sold. Okay. So it sounds like your preference is really to cash out and be complete. I guess I'm wondering though, and hopefully I'm not being too straightforward, being that that's your preference, was there any reason you were even trying to get it rented? Shh. Well, I had tried to sell it before and it didn't sell. Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Right. And now we're shifting because now it's like an expired, you know what I'm saying? And they're like, you're like, oh, okay, I understand. And I guess I'm a little bit confused though, because I mean, it's really nice. It's in a great geographic area. What do you think stopped it from selling when it was on the market? Now we're into an expired conversation. But because I have these things integrated, kind of ingrained in me, you can flow with it. But the process is the same of asking questions, getting to a definite yes or a definite no, just like I would with a probate. It's a similar like initiation, like beginning of that call, like, hi, my name is like to Jose's point, like how he was doing. It's like, hi, I was looking to speak to Mr. Morales. And he's like, yeah, this is Jose. Oh, hey, Jose. My name is Aaron, and I'm a local real estate agent here in Oxnard, and I specialize in probate and estate sales of real property. I was reaching out to you this morning because my head researcher pointed out to me that shortly, if not already, you will be appointed the personal representative in the, forgive my pronunciation, Morales estate. And I was reaching out, recognizing that I may be a little premature in some way. I was calling very respectfully, Jose, with regards to the real property off 1265 Banana Street, simply just to find out if ultimately, at some point, the goal and objective of you, and it looks like your siblings, if you guys were going to get that home on the market and to get it sold and be quiet. You're doing the same thing with the absentee homeowner or the for rent by owner. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
There's an initial conversation, and then I'm going to ask you, is that something that you would consider? We're either going to get yes, no, or maybe. And from yes, no, or maybe, we can take it from there.
There's a pattern. Like, so for example, if they say no, my initial reaction is not a problem. Is it something you would ever consider in the future, or is it a plan to keep the property forever? Forever. And then that'll tell me like, no, like maybe not right now, or maybe a couple years from now. And then you can dig deeper on that, If they say no again, I may throw out like, no, I'm just keeping it forever. I may say, well, what if I had a buyer for the property? If I had a buyer, would you actually consider selling it? Or what if I can get you an offer on the property? If I can get you an offer, would you consider selling it? And I'm either going to get yes, no, or maybe. What I'm trying to flush out is there anything there when they say no? Like, is it really like a no,
is it a real no?
Or no? Or is it one of those knee-jerk reaction no's? Like, meaning like you go to the store and you're like, hey, can I help you? And you're like, no, I'm just looking, Is it one of those? Or is it, because I mean, you went to the store for a reason, or is it really like definitely a no? So I may ask that. And if they say no again, so I may repeat and approve. I may be like, okay, so it sounds like even if there was a buyer that was willing to pay you a really good price, it sounds like you wouldn't be interested in that. But that's just me repeating and approving to make sure that they're understanding what they're saying. And then at the end, I may say, not a problem. Would you mind if I send you my contact information in case something changes?
Exactly. What I would say is like, I appreciate your willingness to share and your kindness, under the circumstances. What I'd like to do in return, I find that things change, people's motivations change over time, particularly with tenants. So I can shoot you a quick email. It'll have my contact information, track record, and what we do to help a lot of families that aren't here locally, get their properties sold. Will that be okay? And they're like, yeah, that's cool. It's great. What's the best email address for you? Grab the email and then you move on.
Yeah. And before I let them go, I would ask them, be like, hey, by any, I know that you decided not to sell this property. Do you have any other properties that you would consider selling? And if they say no, I may say, lastly, there is a shortage of inventory, not enough homes out there. Who would you know that's thinking about selling a property that maybe we can bring them a buyer, or that maybe we can help them sell?
Yeah, I love that.
For a referral,
You're getting way more So there's multiple
squeezed out of
opportunities.
the same lemon, basically.
Exactly. So one would be, if they want to do something. The second one is do they have any other properties? Because if they're an absentee homeowner, there's a possibility
That they
that
may.
they may own other properties that they're and they might be like, well, Jose, as a matter of fact, there's this other one that the lease is coming up, and like I definitely don't want to rent that thing again. Okay, and then it just so I'm clear, is the intention on that one to like get it sold, do a 1031, and reallocate the capital? You're just trying to cash out completely? Like what's the game plan with that? And now I can follow that path. Yeah. And then ideally, how soon would you like to get that on the market? Did you have any idea at all of realistically what you were thinking in terms of getting it sold? I've only spoken to you. Do you have any partners in that property? Right? Or are you the managing partner? How do they feel about selling? Is this based on timing for tax purposes? Like, is it required that we get it sold by this year, or do we have to have a closing by January? You know what I mean? Like, you just start asking questions, and then from there you can move into a closing sequence, and then you can ask for their data, and then you can ask if they know anybody else that perhaps needs our help.
And for me, even if I ask them, would you ever consider selling the property, and they say yes, I like to personally close. I like to say, great, what is a good day for us to get together? That way we can go over the home selling process. Now, here's what's going to happen when you close. When you close, what's going to happen is either they're going to say, no, I'm not ready. Or they're going to give you some sort of like condition, like, to be honest, I'm going to wait to see if I can rent it in the next 2 weeks. And then if I can't rent it in the next 2 weeks, then I'm going to try to selling it. Or no, Jose, if I do sell it, I already have another agent that I would list it with. Or they may say, yes, come over and we can talk about listing the property for sale. And if they say that, then obviously I would set an appointment, and then I would start to qualify that lead. Great. Before we get together, that's only if they tell me yes. I like to do that personally because I feel like closing, like yesterday I had a lead and she's wanted a cash offer. I'm like, great. Is it possible for me to see the property? And she goes, no, it's not possible because there's tenants there and blah, blah, blah. And it tells me a lot about what's going on. And it actually tells me even level of how fast they want to do something when I go for a close, because stuff comes up basically at that point. Now, one of the objections that you might get is, well, look, I want to see if I can rent it first. And if I can't rent it after 2 weeks, then I would consider selling it. So here's the solution to that. What I would say to them is, well, let me ask you this. Like, what if you could actually do both at the same time? Like, what if you could have it listed for rent, but you could actually have it listed for sale and kind of see which one happens first, and to see if you're even happy with the price that you would end up getting? Is that something that you would be open to? And they're like, I actually didn't know that was possible. I didn't know that you can do that. Now, it's not like there may be a chance that they may rent it if you can't sell it in time, but it's a way to basically get your foot in the door where now, hey, they're actually doing both things. And if you can get them the right offer, then they would consider selling at that point.
That's exactly right. Yeah, there's many different options you can go to. Like, if you knew that there was a distinct financial advantage to do it sooner rather than later, would you still want to wait, or would you want to move your timeline up? Right.
Yeah.
If we were able to, and my intention in asking a couple of questions, Jose, is not to be nosy, just to see if I can give you any more information that could be helpful or useful. Being that your primary goal and objective is to sell, would your preference be to wait until the tenant's out and then have to carry the property for a few months before it actually, we sell the property and it closes? Or would you prefer to have an offer in place so that way, when it sells and we're done and complete, you don't have, this property is just sitting empty while we're trying to get it sold? I mean,
So I'll tell you one thing that I also do whenever they say no. Like, if they say no, I'm not considering it. Is it something you consider in the future? Is a plan to keep it forever? My plan is to keep it forever. What if I had a buyer that was interested in the property? No, I would not. I may throw out a hypothetical question, and I would do this with for rent by owners. So with a homeowner, if they're like, no, I would never consider it. Let's say I notice that they have a single story or a 1,000 square foot property. I may say, hey, I know you're on 1,000 square foot property. Have you ever considered moving into something a little bit bigger with a little bit more space? Or let's say I notice that they have 1 bathroom and 3 bedrooms. I may say, hey, have you ever considered, instead of a 1 bathroom, moving into a property with a 2nd bathroom? If they tell me no, what I would do with for rent by owners as well too, I was asking, be like, hey, I know you have a single family residence. Would you ever consider moving that money to a duplex, triplex, or even like a fourplex? And then it opens up the conversation. Hey, I know you have a condo. Have you ever considered taking the equity from the condo and moving it to a single family residence where you don't have an HOA? Hey, I know you have Mello-Roos in your property, that special tax assessment where you're paying an extra $1,000 a month. Would you ever consider moving it to a single family residence so that you don't have that and earn better cash flow instead? And a lot of times they're like, well, you know what? I actually have thought about that. And then what you can do in that situation is you start to kind of dig into the numbers. I'm like, okay, you mind me asking, like, how much positive cash flow this property leaves you? Well, it actually doesn't leave me any positive cash flow. Wait, wait, you're saying that you have to put money out of pocket every month? Oh yeah, I have to put in $300 every single month. Okay. And let me ask you this, like, you mind me asking how much equity you have in the property? I have like $300,000 in equity. Wait, so you have $300,000 in equity and you're having to put $300 out of pocket? You're kidding me. Let me ask you this. What if there was like a different investment where you can move the $300,000 and instead of getting negative 300, you'd actually be earning like $500 a month or $1,000 a month? Or what if I can teach you a strategy where instead of losing $300 a month, you could actually earn $1,000 or $1,500 a month? Is that something that you would be open to? Like, what do you mean? And now you're like starting to have a conversation from like investor to investor, because I understand what they're thinking and I understand what the game is. I'm having a conversation like, hey, what if there was a different strategy? I'll give you guys an example. Like, I had a friend, and this turned into a sale, who basically said, oh yeah, everybody always tells me that it's good to hold real estate. So instead of selling my condo, I'm just going to keep it as a long-term rental. And I asked him and I said, okay, you mind me asking like how much positive cash flow you're going to make? And he goes, about $100 a month. I'm like, you mind me asking how much equity you think you have in there? He goes, I have about 300,000 in equity. I'm like, huh. I'm like, let me ask you this. Like, what if I could teach you a strategy where instead of earning $100 a month, you could earn like $1,000 or $1,500 a month? And he goes, what do you mean? And I go, well, look, what other clients that I had that have a condo, what they want to do is they want to get rid of the HOA because the HOA can increase over time. And obviously there's rules and regulations. Here's what I'm seeing clients do. What I'm seeing clients do is they're selling their condos, taking the equity from that condo, buying a single family residence. A single family residence, you can turn it into 3 units in California. So instead of a single family, you can turn it into a duplex or a triplex. So with the rent, instead of collecting 1 rent, you can go from 1 rent to 3 rents. That would make you anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 a month. Is that something that you'd be open to? And what ended up happening was that he ended up listing the property with me, and he ended up buying an investment property with him. And now he thanks me. He's like, Jose, look, because of you, this $2,000 a month pays for my babysitter every single month. Because I gave him the right guidance. So this niche of for rent by owners and absentee owners, I would say that it does require
some specialized
a little
knowledge.
bit of skill of learning how investors think, how investors run numbers. Do investors ever move up to duplex, triplex, or fourplex? Do investors ever move the money, 1031 exchanges, reverse 1031 exchanges? So that those are the rules of the game that you're going to have to learn.
Yeah. So as you say that, what becomes like what comes up for me and becomes more apparent is there's multiple kind of things that you have to think about and apply. So one is this recognition that I need to look at like data and see what sources are actually converting, not just go with what people are telling me or because it's always been that way. The second is once I figure that out, I have to start reaching out to them. Now, in reaching out to them, we have to remember that our goal and objective is to uncover problems. And once we've uncovered the problems, then we can offer solutions to those problems. I know that part of the reason why you're able to help investors so much is because you've done so much investing yourself. So you can have
100%.
conversations with people about ADUs because you're building ADUs and you already have ADUs on properties. You can have conversations with people about how to really reallocate equity because you're doing the same thing where, you know, you've sold properties in order to get into other investments that produce more cash flow.
I did that at the very beginning of my career, bro, where I sold the property that was making me $200 and I traded it for a property that made me $2,000 a month.
Mhm.
And that with the same equity, the same $100,000 that I had there, bro.
Yeah. So again, like, you know, we've had this conversation about becoming like a real estate professional. People call themselves like realtors. I don't even know what that means. It's just a made up word. But a real estate professional is somebody who understands the sales process, you know, what to say and how to say it, like that sort of thing in terms of generating business, setting appointments. But we also have to understand, you know, other sides of real estate, not just retail. So that way I can ask those questions and discover what the dynamic is and if there actually is a better solution than what they're currently doing. Now, I'm also aware because you've given that guy guidance, he trusts you implicitly. You could call him right now, and if you said to him, "Hey, there's this other thing that I think you should be paying attention to," he would do it because
He is so grateful, man.
yeah.
Think about it. Getting a compliment like your guidance is helping me pay for my son's babysitter, bro. Thanks
Mm,
to you, I'm able to do that because of that guidance.
that's right. So, yeah, and the other thing I wanna is when I hear you kind of the image that pops into my head is when you ask those like, well, what if, you know, you always lead with that, like, well, what if this or what if that or what if I told you or
Would you ever
well,
consider this?
would you ever consider what you're doing is like if somebody immediately says no, it's like you're dropping a line in the water to see if they're going to bite.
Yeah.
That's all it is. You're just trying to like flesh it out. So it's like, well, what if you could actually use this equity and reallocate it into another investment that would produce much more cash? And there would actually be a tax incentive for doing it. Is that something that you'd be open to? Well, what do you mean? Now, the moment that somebody says, what do you mean? That's permission to close. Now you're like, well, just by you saying that demonstrates that we should get together and discuss the options. May I make a suggestion? And you go into a closing sequence. Um, so yeah, you know, this source often you're dealing with perhaps not the most sophisticated investor. They call themselves an investor.
But it's not really like you'd be surprised how many people are losing money and have 400,000 in equity.
Or not even that, but like they're not really investing. You know what I'm saying? Like they think they are, but they're not. And they're managing it themselves. And it's like a mom and pop thing. And it's not really like a business. It's just a job. And they're not sophisticated in kind of analysis or things of that nature. So, you know, you have to have that information so that way you can provide it when they're unaware
Yeah.
of it. So somebody might say like, well, yeah, you know, I'm just going to rent it. Okay. And then is your intention, just so I'm clear, Jose, at some point to get this property sold, or is your intention to hold on to it forever? No, we're going to sell it next year. Okay. And if you don't mind me asking, did you live in this home at one point? Because oftentimes what ends up happening is people live here and then they move, they rent it with the maybe thought or idea, like if we don't like it where we move, we come back. Was that your guys' situation or what's the dynamic? And they're like, yeah, as a matter of fact, we moved to Texas. I'm like, okay, you liking it out there? Yeah. How long ago did you move? Well, we moved 2 years ago. It's coming up on 2 years. Wow. Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, Jose, and my intention in sharing this with you is just to equip you so you can have all the information you need and you can make the decision that you feel is best in terms of what to do with the property and whatever you decide. I support you. If you did decide to rent it again, what that would mean is that the provision in the tax code that would shield cap.
You there, Aaron? I think Aaron cut out, guys. I'm not sure if it was him or me.
Yo, you
Yeah.
gotta one of us have to pay the internet bill, bro. So um So what I would say to them is, let's say they're like, yeah, that actually is what we did. We moved like a year ago. And you're like, oh, okay. Or 2 years ago. It's coming up on 2 years now. Interesting. Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, Jose, and my intention in sharing this with you is not for no other reason other than just to equip you with what you need so you can make the decision that you feel is best. If you did decide to rent it again, right, for another full year, you'd be out of the 5-year provision that would save. You wouldn't have to pay taxes on any capital gain up to $500,000 for you and your wife. Did you know that? And you'd be like, no, yeah. So if you did decide to rent it again, which is perfectly fine, like, and let's say you go to sell it next year, you'd have to sell it for 25-30% more than what we can get today just to break even on those taxes. Wow, I
Which
didn't know
means
that.
the market would have to appreciate 20 to 30% in order for you to end up with the same outcome that you'd end up with right now.
That's right. And then just be quiet and he'll be like, wow, really? Yeah, that's exactly what's true. And truthfully, most homeowners, just like you, Jose, once they recognize that that's what's true, it causes them to reevaluate their plans. I guess I'm wondering if you knew that that was the case, which it is, and if you had an offer that was like super reasonable, super acceptable to you, maybe in the next, I don't know, maybe like 30, 45 days by the end of the year, do you think that'd be something that you'd be open to at least considering? Not only that, what I would ask, actually back up, what I would say is, well, and yeah, and I'm wondering if you don't mind me asking, I see you bought it like, a while ago. How much equity do you have? Well, we have like $500,000. Wow. Let me do the math on that. So if you decided to wait, which is fine, and you're out of that 5-year provision, you would have to pay, gosh, what is that? How much is that? Is that $100,000 in taxes on that gain? Wow. I mean, have you thought of that? They're going to be like, holy smokes, are you serious? Yeah. So, I guess I'm curious. I mean, if we could extract that capital and maybe you can reallocate it where you are locally, because I mean, do you really enjoy being a long distance landlord? Not really. Do you have anybody here helping you manage the property? No. So if you could reallocate that capital closer to you, do you think that would, and save all that money in taxes, do you think that would be in your best interest? Well, it probably would. All right. Well, just by you saying that demonstrates that we should get together and discuss the options. May I make a suggestion? Go into a closing sequence. Right.
Yeah. And it's funny because, and this is where knowledge comes into play. Like a couple years back, I was asked by a military person, be like, hey, look, like I haven't lived in the property for 2 years, but I need to sell. Can I still use that exclusion? And the hard rule is you have to live in there for 2 years. It's not prorated, except if you're military, and
Yeah.
I think a couple of other, like, exclusions. So and at that time, I didn't know. I Googled it, and then I found something online that said that if you're military and you get relocated, because of your job or you get changed stations, it gets prorated. So him living in the property for 1.5 years actually gives him like 80% or 75% of the tax savings that he would had he lived there the 2 years, which that's a lot better than 0% of the tax savings. And when he said that, I was like, oh my God, but these are the types of conversations, or these are this is the type of information that you need to know that will create opportunities for you. I was talking to one person yesterday, and the gentleman shadowing me was saying, like, I would have never been able to have that type of conversation because he didn't understand some of the things that we were saying at this point because he hadn't been exposed to it. Now he'll understand it, but I think that'll lead to more opportunities as well too.
For sure. And it's also, what it also does is create urgency.
Yeah.
And, I find that that's one of like those pro tips. I remember teaching Heath this where, he got good at like just calling and like talking to people, and people would be like, all right, well, like, give me a call back in like 2-3 weeks. And he's like, or in 2-3 months or whatever. He's like, okay. And he ended up with all these leads. I'm like, well, you're not creating any urgency. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you can lead a horse to water. You can't make it drink, but you can make it thirsty. You got to ask questions around that, right? So if they're like, well, give me a call in 2-3 weeks. Well, I'd be more than happy to do that. I guess I'm curious, what I'm aware of is that if somebody has decided to sell and they want to wait 2 or 3 weeks, they usually kind of imagine that there's some sort of benefit in doing that. Just so I'm clear, what do you think the benefit would be in waiting for you personally? If you knew that there was a distinct financial advantage to be on the market sooner rather than later, that something you'd want to take advantage of? Quiet. Well, what do you mean? Well, I don't know if you know this, but in the fourth quarter, right? Everybody has this kind of perception that, no transactions happen. We study this every single year. And for the last 15 years in a row, there's been 2,000 to 3,000 transactions in the month of November and December. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, what ends up happening in those months is that homeowners take their homes off the market. And let me ask you a question. If you wanted to get top dollar, would the best time be to do that when you have lots of competition or less competition? Well, probably when I have less competition. Yeah. And in the springtime, do you know what happens to the inventory? What's that? It goes up historically by 20%. So not only do homes sell in the fourth quarter, but they usually on average get 2% more than homes that are put on the market in the spring. Does that make sense to you? Well, yeah, I never thought about it that way. Yeah. So I guess being that you've already decided to sell, would your preference be to be on the market with less inventory and have a higher degree of probability of getting the most you possibly can, or to wait until you have more competition and see what happens? I mean, which do you think would serve you guys best? Quiet. Well, I mean, I hadn't really considered that, but that makes a lot of sense to me. Okay. Well, just by you saying that demonstrates that we should get together and discuss the options. May I make a suggestion? Go into a closing sequence. Right. So creating urgency. Creating a reason as to why. Like, I remember you told me there was a guy, high-end property, he wants to sell, but he doesn't want to deal with all the gains because he's going to make more than $500,000 on the gains. And you're like, well, what if I told you there was a way that you could put the proceeds into an annuity, and then you could just take distributions from that annuity and only pay taxes on the amount that you pull out? He was like, you can do that? And you're like, yeah, I was just on a podcast with a guy who told me about it. And he was like, nobody's told me that. No, none of the agents I met with, my accountant didn't tell me that. Nobody told me that. Like, well, sounds like you're beginning to see why people like you hire me all the time for the. May I make a suggestion? Yeah, like, let's do this, right? But without that information, you wouldn't be able to. You know what I'm saying?
It's funny because I had an agent that's in our organization yesterday that came to shadow, and he basically was telling me a story. He's like, yeah, this guy walked into an open house and he was telling me that he wanted to buy a property first before selling, and it's a 1031 exchange, and that he doesn't want to sell first, that he wants to buy first. And I asked him, are you familiar with a reverse 1031 exchange? And the guy goes, no, what is that? I proceeded to explain to him what that was, and he tells me nobody has ever shared that with me. Thank you so much. Now, this guy, this agent that we have, is now a little bit higher status than a traditional agent that didn't present him with opportunity. So what I've done in my business is I have made a commitment to know more about real estate than 99% of the people. So what ends up happening is people call me for real estate advice. And guess what happens when they call you for real estate advice? Whenever it comes time for them to do something, they call you because they're calling you for the advice and they trust you.
And one of the mechanisms you've done to do that, not only like one is doing a lot of transactions, so you just learn by doing that. But the second is via your podcast. You're constantly having people on, and truthfully, it's really for you a byproduct is that it helps other people. But like, you get to learn from all these people, all of these different kind of avenues and aspects of real estate, and you can bring that and infuse that into conversation. So,
I've also read books, a lot of books on real estate. Like a lot of people have read a lot of books on like mindset. I've read a lot of real estate books, like commercial, multifamily, syndication books, mobile home parks.
Yeah. And I think you've also done deals. So like I've done those as well. So like I, bought a, way back in the day when they were doing condo conversions in 2006, I bought one of those, lost money. That was a very good learning experience. I've purchased other properties and did the Dave Ramsey thing and paid them off, and that was a learning experience. I've done syndications, and that was a learning experience. I've invested in other different vehicles. I've done private money loans now. Like that's a new avenue. So as you do more,
the private money loan is going to be your favorite, by the way.
I know. So, and as you do more, you fear less is what happens. You don't become fearless. You just fear less. The other thing that happens is you just make yourself more savvy. Right. So when somebody says to you, hey, Jose, like I'm thinking about buying like, this place that has something on top for my business, or my business could be below and my housing's on top. You're like, yeah, I've done that because you did. Yeah. And I guess, so, what I'm aware of is it could work out. Here's some things that you might want to consider. Let me ask you a couple questions first. Number one, do you have Children. How are you with noise? Does it bother you a lot?
Yeah.
Like, how long do you plan on staying there for? Is your family at its full capacity now? Because as a young man, I bought a much smaller place than I probably should have because I was thinking small. Right? So, like, is your family at full capacity? Or do you plan on, like, having more children? Is that a good school district? Like, what age group are your children in? Right? And is that something that you've considered? Is your intention to send them to private school, or are you going to send them to the public schools? Have you researched those schools? So notice, like, we're just going to like ask a lot of questions, and from that, then give guidance.
It's even funny because I was role playing with shout outs to Matt Green from Philly, and he was telling me that one of the ways that he sets up the asking a lot of questions, he'll say, as a professional, um, I have found that the better I understand what your needs and what your situation is, the better guidance that I could provide you as a professional. And I was like, that's actually a really nice way
Super solid.
of phrasing, like, hey, I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you a bunch of, as a professional, what I have found is that the better I understand your situation, the better guidance I'll be able to give you. I do have a couple of questions for you or something along those
Yeah.
lines.
So,
And I'm
and
like,
you can
man,
combine like what I say with what he says. So it's like, as a professional, I have found that the more clarity I have on a situation, the better I'm able to serve you and to provide you with the information you need so you can create the outcomes that you want. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. I need you to know and understand my intention is to be nosy. It's just so I can have that clarity and serve you best. Would that be okay? And they're
boom.
like, boom. Like, who's going to say no to that? They're going to be like, oh, yeah, like, this is great. Go ahead.
If somebody said that to me, like, as a professional, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
"Okay," like, I'm like, "Great,"
Yeah.
like,
I'm listening.
you know? And
Yeah.
that's
And
really
if
what it is.
it's
That's
really
what a
what it is.
professional does,
Mhm.
you know?
And what's interesting, you're going to be more open to their guidance, whatever it is, because they demonstrated to you that, like, hey, I care enough to ask you all these questions. And
Yeah,
I'm not attached to whatever the outcome is. Right. So, like, perhaps I just give you guidance and you don't do anything. And maybe that's the guidance. Maybe the guidance is, you know what, Jose? Yeah, go ahead and rent it again. It's fine. Maybe the guidance is like, okay, this is plays this role in your portfolio. And as such, you have this big tax bill that's coming up from over here. So here's a strategy of a way that you can sell this and purchase one of these three assets in real estate, whether it be a hotel, a gas station, or a short-term rental that you could get accelerated depreciation from and offset your tax bill. Has anybody talked to you about that? They'll be like, nah, dude, my CPA didn't say anything about that. Oh, okay. Well, is that something that you'd be open to or interested in learning more about? I would. Well, just by you saying that demonstrates that we should get together and discuss the options, maybe make a suggestion, close.
and it reminds me of, like, there's two, like, imagine, like, you going into the doctor and you're telling them your head hurts, and the doctor automatically says, "Hey, let's do brain surgery on you." Automatically,
Yeah.
without asking you any questions.
Not a
Then you go
single
to
question.
not a single question, just, "Hey, let's do brain surgery." Okay, think about this. How many times a guy called me yesterday, he's like, "Hey, I wanna sell my property," or, "I'm considering selling my property." If I'm like, "Okay, great, let's go sell it," without asking him any questions. That's what it feels like to the consumer. Like, "Hey, let's do brain surgery." And you're like, "Hey, slow down." Like you don't even know why it hurts or anything like that. Versus a doctor that's like, "Okay, do you mind, as a professional, as a doctor, it's actually helpful for me to understand a little bit more about what's going on. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Hey, did you hit your head? Like, how long has it been hurting? Where does it hurt? What type of pain is it?" That's the same thing that we're doing as agents by asking them the questions. What came out at the very end, and the guy looked at me weird, that guy that was shadowing me, he's like, "Why didn't you just go out there?" I'm like, "Look, it may not make sense for him to sell." So at the end of the analysis, after I collected all the information, how much his payment was at his current property, how much the tenants were paying, how much positive cash flow he was making, it turns out that at the current property, he's making $2,000. At the next property, he would be losing $1,000 a month the moment he buys it. And best case scenario is $1,000 positive cash flow for him a month, mainly because the interest rate that he has increased significantly.
Yeah. And then
So
the only
now,
other thing, so then there, now that you've gathered that data, you can say to him,
does it
and
still make sense for you?
yeah, like, hey, well, based on what we're looking at, just so you know, your cash flow would actually go down. So are there any other variables in terms of the sale that you'd be interested in? So in other words, like I did something where I reallocated capital from an asset that has like HOAs and like all that other stuff and like monthly dues, like a townhome, to some single family residential home that has no HOA. Because I know with a very high degree of probability as time progresses, that will go up in value way more than the other one. And we talked about this. And I was like, hey, like, here's what I'm thinking about doing. And you were like, and I told you my logic and you were like, yeah, that makes sense. So even though that might cash flow maybe a little bit less, there was another factor and there was a tax implication too as to why I was doing it. So this is where it's like, you have to know about these things to have these conversations. I think, you know, as agents, we imagine like, you know, the people chime into these lead sources like, okay, what's the magical lead source where I can just call somebody up and be like, do you want to sell? And they're like, yes. And I go and I list the property. It's like, no, dude.
You're still going to have to qualify the lead to be able to see, hey, is this something that they actually want to do? So to your point, that guy was like, well, look, the benefit of this other property, even though we're losing money, it's that it's literally right next door to my parents' house, which would be extremely easy to manage. So we may be okay with losing the $1,000 a month if this works out. So it's like, great, you know, at that point, but at least this way you understand their situation and have help them think this out, whether or not they actually want to do it, which makes it a more motivated seller if they do decide to do it.
Yeah, and it also it cultivates trust whether they decide to do it or they don't. So I remember sitting down with a seller one time, and this was like it's even somebody that I knew. It was my mom's like employer at the time. And she did well, and she owned a very large house. And this was like 2008-ish. And it was like $1 million listing, which was like wild at the time for me, you know? And I remember I was going over stats. I was going over numbers with them. And I'm like, look, inventory is exploding. You know, here's what's happening. Demand is dropping. You know, the marketplace, what do you think the marketplace is showing us? And like, no. They were doing resulting in their brains. Like, it'll be fine. It was fine before. And they had made so much money, like investing properties, you know, from like 2003 to 2007 and 8, they were just flipping and making tons of money. And they weren't able to like just emotionally separate themselves from that and realize that just because that's the way it was before, it doesn't mean it is the way now. I have to look at data right now to tell me what's happening right now. So I told them the truth. It was on the market. They would not lower the price. They ended up taking it off the market and trying to sell it on their own. They ended up selling it for way less money than what they wanted to sell it for. And then probably 5 years later, Jose, they invite me over their house. Actually, no, they were selling another home for sale by owner, and I called them. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? So I go over, I sit down. The husband looks right at me. You know what he said to me? He's like, you know why you're here, right? I'm like, why? He's like, because you're the only one who told us the truth. He acknowledged I was telling him the truth before. He knew I was telling him the truth before. And because of that, we built trust. I ended up selling that home for them and like 3 other homes for them after that. So the idea is like by asking all of these questions, what you just said there is critical is now I'm serving as a guide to help them to solve their problems. Now it's like we're triangulating ideas together, right? Which is how it should be with a professional. Not just like transactionally, hey, come over here, sign the paperwork, sell my home. Like sometimes that happens, but what we're talking about here is like what Pace would call, and somebody just dropped it in here, Evan, which is like finding bunnies, like finding what the problems are, and then really getting clarity and asking like just surgical questions around it. So like to your point where the guy was like, yeah, you know, just I'm looking at these numbers and it looks like, Jose, cash flow is actually going to go down. Now, I'm aware that people have other reasons for wanting to sell. Sometimes it's just reallocating different assets. Sometimes it's proximity to schools or things of that nature. Just so I'm clear, is there any other motivating factor here other than just the financials? And he's like, yes, as a matter of fact, it's right next to my parents. And that's like very important to me. Okay, well, tell me a little bit more about that. Why is it important? Well, we've had property managers in the past and they cheated and steal and whatever, you know what I mean? And we don't want to deal with that anymore. Okay. And is that something that's valuable enough for you that you would consider perhaps taking a little bit less cash flow? Yes. Okay. And I've only spoken to you. Do the other parties feel the same way? They do. Okay. So being that you guys have made that decision, ideally, how soon would you like for me to have it on the market for sale for you? Now we're just closing. But do you see how until I'm like, boop, boop, boop. And what I find, Jose, is that agents they get so excited about the possibility, they leave out all of that. And then they get really disappointed in the end because they find out the other partners don't feel the same way. They find out, you know what I'm saying? They find out later down the road.
And they just wasted all this time.
All this time, bro. All this time. I was on a coaching call this week where somebody was like, yeah, I went there and this was a different lead source. It was for sale by owner, but she's like, I went over there and the lady, the husband already moved. They just bought the house though. So, they're going to lose money. And husband already moved. And, I got her to sign and then they changed their mind afterwards. And I asked one question. I said, was the husband there? No. I was like, did you ask for the husband to be present on Facebook or Zoom? I mean, on like a live stream, like on Zoom or on FaceTime? She was like, no. I said, okay, this is what we call tuition to the game. She said, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I said, tuition. Like, did you go to school before? She's like, yeah. I'm like, well, you pay tuition, right? To learn something? She's like, yeah. I'm like, well, this is your tuition to learn this particular thing. You ready? I want you to pay very close attention to me. Look at me right in the camera. She looks at me. You never present without having all the parties there. Because almost always, like probability wise, it's like a 10-15% chance that it works out. Right. So you want to make sure that you frame it in the right way. So I'm really excited to connect with you, Jose, and I make it a business practice to connect with all decision makers. So I know that, your significant other has already moved. So if we were to connect and they were going to be on FaceTime or Zoom with us, do you think that would work like maybe in the early evenings or a little bit later in the evening? What would work best for you guys?
Yeah.
And then be quiet. And then I told her to bring the paperwork electronically. Because if he's out there, right? You could have her sign it and be like, yep. So now that we're in agreement, and then I would also get his email address and send him all the information you're going to be reviewing with her. So that when you're on FaceTime, you're all looking at it together at the same time. And I could just watch these light bulbs popping off in her head because she wasn't even considering any of that. And that's just like setting yourself up for success, right? Where you're creating an environment thoughtfully. Caring is like being thoughtful is like a form of caring. So like I care about these people enough to create an environment that's conducive for them getting closer to them getting what they want.
Yeah. Well, it's even like with sometimes we get cash offer leads on divorces. And one of the questions that I ask is, hey, is your significant other on the same page about wanting to get the cash offer? Are they aware that you're requesting a cash offer? No, they're not. So it's a different conversation completely. I'm not going to, in that case, I made the decision not to go out there. But if you guys have enjoyed this episode, tell them what's up, Nabello.
Yeah, like, what I'm aware of is our intention is to continue to keep adding as much value as we possibly can. The takeaway that I want you guys to walk away from is that there's more lead sources than just the 4 horsemen. I believe that agents of the future will understand retail. They'll also understand wholesale. They'll also understand, flips, novations. They will be much more sophisticated and much more savvy. The marketplace is demanding that of us with all of these rule changes. For those who pivot and change, they will get their unfair share of the business. Those who don't, won't. And they'll have a new script, which is, would you like fries with that, ma'am? Let's go be great.
There you guys.
Lead Builders out.